Hello and welcome to Health and Wellness, your guide to the integrated personal and financial retirement journey for physicians. I'm your host, Michael Swartz, Certified Financial Planner and Master Certified Physician Development Coach. Welcome back to the Health and Wellness Podcast, Part 2 with Dr. Scott Abramson, retired neurologist from Kaiser Permanente. Again, Scott, we talked about it. Your career spanned 6 decades, although you only worked just over 40 years. But
Yeah.
from 1979 to 2020, awesome anecdote. And, in this conversation, now we talked about your career. Now we'll talk about what you did to prepare for retirement, what your experience was like in that transition. And specifically, you mentioned a really great opportunity about kind of revisiting that spousal relationship. So a little bit of foreshadowing here on what we'll be talking about. Where would you like to start us off here as you start to talk about maybe the later part of your career and what you did to prepare for your retirement?
Well, I retired in January of 2020. And honestly, I was having so much fun working at that time. Those were the best years of my life, these last years that I was working and employing the communication styles that we had been taught at Kaiser. So I really wasn't ready to retire. I was 72 years old in 2020 when I did retire. But my wife said that, if I didn't retire, she was either going to divorce me or kill me. So I figured retire, divorce, kill. I'll take the retirement. So I but I did prepare for my retirement. And at Kaiser, you have to give a year's notice. I gave about 18 months notice. And really, the other thing, not only was I just having so the best time of my career when I was working, in spite of all the workload and all the other stuff, but I was afraid of retirement. And I was afraid of retirement because, number one, I'm a very introverted person. And I don't have a lot of friends outside of my workplace. The place where I worked, these were my friends, these were my family, these who I talked to all day. And I knew I was gonna, I wasn't gonna have that when I retired. So that was a something to fear. I also, I think like everybody, you fear, oh my gosh, to clean up my office, to get rid of all this stuff. Oh my God, I just as soon work till I die. I don't want to clean up my office. So that was another thing. And the other thing uh, is that I realized, I mean, this is kind of sick, but I realized that I often used my work as a way to get out of, and I mentioned I was an introvert, to get out of social engagements. So it was like, oh, my wife would say, oh, we're invited to this dinner party. And I would go, oh, sorry, dear, I'd love to go, but I'm on call that weekend. I just can't make it. I'd so much like to. So now if I'm retired, I'm not going to have that excuse. So I'm going to have to go to these dinner parties or cocktail parties or something like that. So I was, so I, uh, so from a lot of things I was, and I wasn't a guy. I didn't have hobbies. I didn't have sports. I didn't play golf. I didn't play cards, things like that. I didn't hang out. I didn't play poker. I didn't hang out with guys. I was, just my wife and my family were my life, and Kaiser. So I had a lot of fears about retirement in that regard. But one of the things I did, I really consciously and in a very focused manner prepared. So starting a year before I retired, I started slowly just cleaning out my cabinets, cleaning out my office, and so forth. And as I got, and I did this, in a very, very deliberate manner. I started telling patients, even 6 months before, that I would be retiring. And I had my staff, remind patients. I, in the last notes that I was writing in the last 3 or 4 months, I would make sure that they were detailed notes, that they were comprehensive notes, so that the doctor taking care of them in the future would know. And sometimes I would even try to, walk them down, introduce them to the doctor that was going to be taking care of them. And I built up, like a lot of doctors, a lot of vacation time and stuff like that. So the last 3 or 4 months I worked, the last 4 months maybe I worked 3/4 time, and the last 3 months and 2 months I worked half time, and then I worked the last month maybe just 1/5 time, or just, and then the last week or two I didn't see any patients. I was still employed, and I would come in and I would just try to get all patient phone calls, just take care of everything, make sure was everything I could was just tied up as neatly as it could be, and transferred. And because, and the other thing is in those last months, you're going to be seeing a lot of times your patients, long-term patients, for the last time, and those goodbyes can take a while. And and I think doctors need to be prepared for that you need to kind of taper back your schedule in those last months, because it's going to take longer. And so those were some of the things that I did to prepare for retirement. And those were some of the obstacles that I faced. But
Well,
overall, yeah.
go ahead.
No, 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 no. Go ahead. Sorry.
What you're alluding to is very, I mean, it echoes what so many other retiring and retired physicians have shared. And I think the fact that you've done it, I think I just want to invite the story that it is possible. I mentioned this to a 55-year-old physician here at Gunderson Health Systems. I said, there's a way to step this down. And he looked at the stair steps from, full-time working to the day you retire, and if we can do some stepping down. And he
Yeah.
said, he pointed right at the piece of paper, he tapped, he said, that's going to be extremely difficult. And so I can hear the reservations from so many physicians to say, nope, I'm solely focused on my career up until the day I retire. But you had mentioned, another element we talk about in the book is wake up calls, where your wife says, hey, you got three options here. Um, you know, which one would you like? And you go with the easy option of retiring, which is it's not easy in any right, but certainly more preferable than the other two, you
It
know.
was more preferable than the other two.
And yet you were able to kind of do this inventory, take 18 to 12 months and say, here's how I'll be developing closure for my career, saying goodbye to patients, realizing that the community that you had built was derived from your career. And being an introvert, kind of some of the things that you're losing too, maybe honoring that, hey, there goes your excuse for the dinner parties. And so
Yeah,
it seems to me that the real focus of all of that, those being kind of the anecdotal elements of it, is you made this a conscious transition. You
yes,
faced the fears, and I could hear so many others, Scott, saying it is scary, but if I don't talk about it, it won't happen. We had a hospice physician who said, I see it in my patients. They think if they don't talk about death and dying, that it won't come eventually. And yet, light bulb went on. He was doing that with his own retirement. And so you brought it into consciousness and you said, let's find some actionable steps to take as we approach retirement. And it
yeah,
sounds like it did ease that transition. I guess
yeah.
is that true?
Yes, it really did. I just focusing on just common sense things. And like I said, I don't know how it is in other places, but at Kaiser, most doctors, we build up a lot of vacation time, and I chose to, take that as sort of a drawdown time for making the best exit I could.
Well, that kind of brings us up to the day that you retire. So you went through this process of, retiring well. It brings
Yeah.
us up to the day that you retire. Anything special about that day that, folks that are still working should know about, good or bad?
Yes, yes. Well, let me focus on let me focus on about 2 weeks after the day I retired.
Okay.
So about 2 weeks after, um, it's early in the morning. I'm still getting up early. I feel like I can't. I got to get up at 5 o'clock, because that's what a working person does. So anyway, I'm getting up, I use 5 o'clock, and I'm going to stop at Starbucks, which I usually do to get a cup of coffee before going into work. And as I park the car and I'm walking into Starbucks, I see this woman coming from the other direction going to Starbucks. I know she's going to Starbucks too. Now, I figure if she gets there before me, it will take another like 57 seconds for me to get my coffee. So I'm thinking to myself, I'm not going to let this happen. I've got to save those 57 seconds. So I sort of pick up my pace, not in an obvious way, but like I'm sort of a little, healthy jog type thing, because I want to beat her to the coffee line. And so I get there, and all of a sudden I realize, why am I doing this? I don't have to go to work. It doesn't matter if there's 57 seconds later than I get my coffee. And the reason I tell you this story is because that mentality, that beat the Starbucks coffee line mentality stays with us. It's like we always are competitive. We always got to get the upper hand. We always got to be there first. We got to be we can't waste time. And that mentality that's what kept us, I think, a lot of us, good doctors and proficient doctors, and made us a success that we had professionally. And it's that same mentality, but you just can't get rid of it once you retire. And it's so, and by the way, I beat her to the line. I just want you to know. But it's that mentality that still now that still drives it drives me to some extent, and I know a lot of my colleagues, we've got to feel like we're doing something.
Yeah.
I know very few colleagues that I know that just suddenly said, retirement, I just retired. All of a sudden I've been working, 80 hours a week. I'm going to the beach, and I'm just, the rest of my life, I'm just sitting in a beach chair and watching, the seagulls or something. We still have that drive, and that, that competitiveness and so forth doesn't go away.
Well, one thing that I've found in coaching, especially physicians who I've coached across kind of that transition and the day they retire into retirement, is the word pace. And that seems to be what you're speaking to, is the pace of healthcare has accelerated. Physicians have adapted and adopted that mindset, and it comes with that complementary, sorry, yeah,
Yeah.
the complementary mindset of competitiveness and achievement and just that drive, that motivation. So they kind of go hand in hand, the pace and the drive, and yet are, an accelerated pace and that motivation and drive, great tools, maybe a challenge to apply them in retirement. How
Yes.
did you navigate that? So the
Yeah.
awareness pops in at Starbucks. What
Yeah.
changed after that day, if anything?
Yeah, yeah, and I would even go further, Michael. I would say that it's not just that the pace of medicine picked up, and we had to become, and we did, probably more competitive, more driven, and so forth. But that's what got us into this field
Yeah,
in the first
yeah,
place. I mean, we had to
yeah.
test the SATs, the med board, interview. So that kind of thing got us in there in the first place, and it sort of accelerated. Yeah, and well, it was, and here's the other thing I noticed when I retired. Here is something that definitely happened. Is, like I said, I was enjoying my work. I didn't feel like I was burnt out. But right after I retired, it was the start of COVID, and sort of my wife and I had planned all these trips and vacations, but we couldn't do it, and everything was shut down, especially here in California. So what we would do is we would walk. We went for a walk on this beach about 20 miles away, Half Moon Bay. It was kind of a deserted beach. And every day we would go on this walk. We'd walk 3 or 4 miles. We'd bring a picnic lunch, sit on a bench. And that was kind of our day. And I realized that as I was walking, that suddenly I felt this lift, this great lifting of a burden, this great lifting of the pressure. And it felt good. That, in other words, if I was in other words, I didn't have to worry about getting home in time to check my inbox, to make patient phone calls. I didn't have to worry about charting when I got home. I didn't have to worry about um, about patients I might have, missed a test on or should have done something on. I didn't have to do that, and this great burden had lifted. And like I said, it wasn't like this burden of burnout. I didn't feel like I was burnout, but the constant pressure to perform, to achieve, to do the right thing. It felt wonderful. Uh, Although, and let me tell you about it. I want to just tell you a challenge about that. So one of the things is it took me about a month before I would stop spontaneously reaching to my belt to pick up my pager. I kept doing it, every 30 minutes I was doing. It took me a month to break out of that. I um I still, and to this day, I still wake up at 2 a.m. with nightmares about a patient. Oh my God, this patient, I forgot to see them. I left, I got to go back in that. And then I wake up in a cold sweat and think. Now, fortunately, those nightmares have become less and less over the last 5 years that I've retired, but I still get them. And I would imagine a lot. I mean, I still get nightmares like, when I was in the fifth grade and I had to do a book report for Miss Dean and I forgot my book report and I'm sitting in class with my underwear. So I still get those kind of nightmares. But the nightmares about the forgotten patient, fortunately, they're getting less and less. The challenge for me still, and I'm talking about this Starbucks get in the line first, mentality. So my wife and I are walking in Half Moon Bay. It's a beautiful part, a beautiful sort of isolated beach. And as we walk, my wife is thinking, look at those beautiful flowers. Look at the birds up there. Aren't they beautiful? And it was a real effort for me to put myself in that mindset, to enjoy that moment, to enjoy the present, because all my life it's been focused on the future, or, take remorse about the past, the things you should have done. And so and I find myself, even though we're walking, my wife is enjoying the sunshine. I'm thinking, I'm not thinking, I'm thinking, now I don't have to worry about patients when I get home, but you know, what am I going to have for supper? Should I go out to eat? Should I, I've got a phone call to make to somebody. I should be checking in on this person. So it's always, I'm walking there and there's always this to-do list and I'm not focusing on enjoying the present. And it's a constant battle. I'm trying to get better. I'm trying to enjoy the birds and the flowers and the sunshine. And I can focus on it for brief periods. But there is this and I think in a lot of doctors, there is this drive, this energy force that you've got to be doing something. And usually that voice tells you you've got to be doing something useful.
Mm-hmm. And is that it's so it contrasts from the being present. It has
Yeah.
no real. It sounds utilitarian, so to
Yes,
speak.
it is. Yes, yes. It's very utilitarian. It's very practical. It's not soaking in the joys of the present. It
Yeah.
really isn't. And yeah, so that kind of thing has been a struggle for me, the mindset struggle of of that we all have had, and people that go into these competitive professions and so forth. So I'm trying to do better. It's been 5 years. Maybe I'm doing a little better.
Well, yeah, and I appreciate you saying that, Scott, because I think a lot of folks think, well, I'll get into retirement, it'll be the highlight reel, and as we know, it follows a bit more of this Dunning-Kruger effect kind of peak, and then there's this valley of uncertainty, and you really need to work through it to get to the more comfortable, sustainable
Yeah,
behaviors of retirement. And you're saying, hey, 5 years into this thing, and I'm still a student of retirement. And
yeah,
I'm curious too here, Scott, if we can pull some of those fears that you had about retirement and maybe draw them forward and say, what were some that came true? What were some legitimate fears that called you to dealing with some real issues? And what were some of the fears that maybe you had about retirement that never really came to fruition? And in doing so, just as a closing thought here, I just want to say thank you for sharing about these nightmares and some of the more challenging parts of retirement too. It, it's going to allow a lot of people to feel a lot more comfortable with the fears, reservations, and real experiences that they have about their own retirement. Um, so thank you first and foremost for bringing that forward. And then, yeah, some of the fears that you maybe anticipated that either did or didn't come to fruition.
Yeah, yeah. So, just to get back to what you said, Michael, if someone is listening to this podcast and they say, "Gosh, that's right," I use my call schedule to get out of dinner dates and something. I do that too, but I'm too embarrassed to admit it. I'm ashamed to say it. So if I can bring that person out of the closet, so to speak, and say, you're not alone, my friend. We're gonna, we got a support system for docs who use the on-call system to get dinner dates. It'll be HIPAA compliant and whatever. Yeah, So if anybody feels that, if that resonates with anybody, I'd be happy. The things Michael, it actually turned out and it worked out well for me because I found things, and this was after a period of time because COVID was sort of devastating for several months and years, it did. But I really found things that appealed to my passions and appealed to that part of me that said, Scott, you got to do something useful. You got to do something useful. Uh, and this goes back, like I said, my father was a traveling salesman. He sold vacuum cleaners. Actually, he sold vacuum cleaners in the Midwest through Milwaukee, and he may have sold your grandparents a vacuum cleaner. The Ace Electrolux vacuum cleaner. I was born in Des Moines, where he was working, and so and he always wanted me, his son, to not have to, what he said, beat my brains out. Get a profession. And I can remember as like a 12 years old, I would like to read Sports Illustrated. And I mean, not just the swimsuit issue, but the Sports Illustrated stuff. And if ever he called me, he said, "What are you reading that stuff? What are you reading that stuff? Get an encyclopedia, read the encyclopedia." So the idea of relaxing and reading Sports Illustrated or just whatever is like it's kind of not doesn't sit well with me because I can hear my father's voice. May so rest in peace. So, but I have found things that appeal to my passion, and they've really made these 5 years the happiest, the most rewarding years of my life. They really have. Um,
What advice would you have for folks who are facing retirement, don't know what those passions are yet, and maybe that fear becomes an inhibitor to exploring what those passions are beyond medicine, beyond their career?
Yeah. See, I was lucky. I was lucky in that I knew what my passions were during those last 20 years I retired. My passions were communication, physician wellness. So I knew I was lucky I had that calling and that passion. So after I retired, I looked into enterprises that I could develop those and use those. And so I got into those things, and I could talk to you about some of the organizations and enterprises that I've gotten into because of that. But I guess I haven't thought about that question, Michael, but I guess I would tell them, just take inventory and say, what do you really, what gives you pleasure? What gives you satisfaction? What makes you feel like you're doing something worthwhile? And maybe it's something like, teaching Sunday school, or maybe it's like, working in a soup kitchen, or maybe it's just, whatever, being physically active, learning getting better at golf, getting better at hiking, getting better at pickleball or something like that. But, I guess maybe being a better grandparent or parent. So I would guess I would have to say is think about what gives you the most satisfaction in your work outside of your working life, and try to develop that in your retired life.
Well, that's such a powerful statement, Scott, because the whole concept of the health and wellness model is the VIP retirement of discovering values, identity, and purpose beyond
Yeah,
your career. And
yeah,
so when you're talking about what resonates, what calls you, what feels like a passion project beyond what has called them into medicine, for physicians, it really comes down to your personal values, your sense of identity outside of being a physician, and then that purpose statement that really serves as a metaphor for why you do things and what it is that you do, whether it's being of service to others through, you know, action or professionalism or relationships or communication, but what calls you to something bigger than yourself, right? It's knowing yourself well enough, the values and identity, so that you can go out and serve that greater purpose in retirement. And you mentioned you found those things rather quickly. It sounds like because you knew the things that brought you the greatest value, you knew beyond being a physician what resonated with you and what drew you to being really the best version of yourself that you could be.
yes, yes, yes. And I think that most docs have that inner drive to be of service.
Yeah.
That phrase, be of service, and I've seen so many of my colleagues who retired is they transform that inner that inner drive to be of service, and so many of them are going on medical missions, Africa, all sorts of places. They're working in charity clinics. They're mentoring other physicians. So many of them are, you know, comporting with that inner drive and inner passion and doing those things.
Well, then what a blessing on this retirement transition to say, 5 years ahead, there may be some fears and reservations, but 5 years in, there's so much positivity, so much ability to repurpose, so long as you're willing to do that work, so long as you're willing to be conscious kind of about this iterative process of checking in with yourself, calibrating, taking action, checking in, calibrating, taking action, and over time really developing a life in retirement that's fulfilling. And one of those positive elements that we talked about, Scott, kind of in our pre-dialogue, that I'd love to have you share more about that we don't typically touch on, but you were going ear to ear with just the relationship with your wife and how
Yeah,
spousal relationships are affected. Not only can you not get out of the dinner party, but you mentioned that I married you for better or worse and for life, but maybe not for lunch. And
yeah,
yeah, retirement is 24/7, 365 with your spouse. So would you mind sharing a little bit about that positive element of your retirement?
yeah. And I think that in general, that sometimes is an issue. That everything works fine in a marriage. A doctor goes to work every day, comes home, works on the weekends, and the wife, handles the children or whatever. Or maybe she has a career too. But they really haven't spent all that much time together. And so suddenly they're not just for better or for worse, but for lunch, and it ain't working. I mean, they find out they got nothing to say, or they really don't like what they have to say, and when they speak, and they get on each other's nerves. So I think that sometimes can be a problem. And I have had, and like I said, I've been retired 5 years, and my wife and I, we're spending a lot more time together. And sometimes I hear her say things like, "Stop clinging," or "Get a job," or something. But all in all, it's really the retirement has been so good for both of us. We just enjoy being with us, and sometimes it's just even like, well, today she's playing mahjong, and she'll come home at lunchtime, and we'll go to Half Moon Bay, and we'll take a walk, and we'll sit on a bench, and we'll hold hands, and just beautiful. I'm so blessed that it worked out in that way. And I know sometimes that it doesn't, with folks after retirement. And getting back to the yeah, I think when people retire and they think about what are my values, what's my passion, what am I thinking? I think it's a good idea not just to wait till the retirement to pursue those, but let's say there is a you have a passion for, let's say, musical instruments or playing the guitar. Well, maybe start that, you know, while you're still working, and make time for that, so that it's an easy transition to go in there. Or if you think about volunteering, maybe get in touch with an organization that you want to volunteer with. Maybe it's a charity clinic, and start working there maybe once a month, just to get the head of. So then when you make that transition, it's a lot easier.
Well, you mentioned the social aspects of your career and how, a lot of your friends were at work. Yeah, that on ramp to retirement to developing social networks and hobbies outside of your career. I mean, you mentioned getting ahead of that. Don't wait until the day you retire to start. Um, if you're able to use some of that banked PTO, that vacation time,
Yeah,
and an invitation, maybe take the sabbatical too. Whatever's in your contract to just say, what is retirement really going to be like, and how am I going to fill this time? One story that comes to mind is a physician who dropped to a point 0.8 about 2 years before he retired. He just said it was so different, a 3-day weekend compared to a 2-day weekend. Even that alone just made him realize you can only read so many books to fill the time, and you need these passion projects and maybe social networks. So getting that started sooner than later while you're still retiring, rather
yeah,
than, waiting until retirement to develop those. It sounds like that was really powerful for you.
yeah. Yeah. I did do some, preliminary work, and got involved in things before I actually retired. So I knew I knew what I was getting into, and I knew it was going to be a pretty smooth transition.
Excellent. Well, as you look back, Scott, at your career, and we draw to a close kind of the second half of our conversation, anything that comes to mind here for you as maybe a greater theme, or kind of a big bow to put on this conversation to say, if I could only say one thing about this, what would that be for physicians who are looking at this retirement transition?
I would say really it's the 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 secret, I think, to life, the secret to happiness is gratitude. It's just being grateful for what blessings you have, and really living, and really realizing and appreciating those blessings, uh, and being grateful. I think that's really the key to anything. I think. I do, and Michael, I just thought, I know that you also do a lot of financial work too, in financial planning for retiring doctors, and one thing just came to mind. I this is the and fortunately, working at Kaiser, they had great retirement plans and all that, and I just left that up to Kaiser. But when I was working, I think one of the worst things a doctor can do, the worst thing financially a doctor can do, is to take financial advice from another doctor. Because every place I worked, there was always some guy. He was the guy. He was the financial guru. Oh, you got your bonus this year. Why don't you talk to Dave? God, he knows everything about all these startups and everything. And so I talked to Dave, and I put my whole bonus, everything into this, fly by night stock. I thought I was going to be a millionaire and everything. And as you can imagine, things went bust. But so just one piece of financial advice. Uh, your fellow doctors don't know squat. Don't trust them.
Well, I appreciate the shameless plug there, Scott. And as you know, my professional credentials aren't just the CFP marks, kind of what's the matter, what's the money side of things, but the physician development coach side is really what matters. And
Yeah,
really what coaching allows you to do is assign reasons, and it assigns a purpose behind the actions for why we're managing that money a certain way. And you mentioned seeing that transition in healthcare. It's not only having someone who cares, but having someone who cares about why it matters to you too.
yeah,
And I really appreciate you calling that out. And it's really kind of the impetus behind the whole health and wellness brand is a ton of CFPs are going to be out there wanting to manage multi-million-dollar portfolios. But there's this quality of life element that money doesn't buy happiness. Money can't buy happiness, right? But it can certainly help unlock opportunities to find it. And
Yeah,
that's where going one layer deeper of figuring out why or what matters to physicians. What have they delayed? What passions or trips or vacations or investments have they forsaken during the course of their career? And to your point, plenty of other physicians trying to get people invested in two biggest ones are, cryptocurrency or what we call passive investment with rental real estate. And, if it sounds too good to be true, I'd say it's definitely worth taking a second look at in your experience with Dave, right? If it sounds too good to be true,
yeah,
it may just be.
yeah, yeah. Watch out for Dave. They're everywhere.
Fair enough. Well, Scott, on that note, thank you for just the wisdom. I sense a lot of wisdom coming through the stories and the experiences that you've had in your transition. And like you said, if it resonates with one other physician, any anecdote here or any piece of the story, um, really just trying to make these more comfortable conversations for everyone who's facing this transition and coming up to it, whose careers maybe span 4, 5, 6 decades in healthcare.
Yeah, yeah.
So thank you so much for what you shared today.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Any closing words before we sign off?
Don't talk to Dave. Leave him alone.
All right. Well, thank you, Scott. I appreciate your time. And yeah, just wonderful insights from you. So thank you again for being on the Health and Wellness podcast.
Thank you, Michael. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Health and Wellness Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Michael Schwartz, Certified Financial Planner and Master Certified Physician Development Coach. If you're looking for additional resources for integrated physician retirement planning, please visit healthandwellness.com. We'll see you in the next episode.